Hey everybody, today we are going to make a sourdough starter. I've had a lot of people talk to me and ask me about the availability of getting yeast, how to make things like these. So today what we're going to do is, this is something that everybody should learn how to do, basically. Especially this day and age, some products are kind of hard to find. So having your own starter, a sourdough starter, quote unquote, is also a good way to make your own yeast. What we're going to do is we're going to use natural yeast in the air in your environment, and flour. All we're really using is flour and water. So when it comes to making a sourdough starter, you can use all-purpose flour, you can use high-gluten flour, you can use bread flour. I really wouldn't recommend cake flour, but that's all you got, that's all you got. That being said, I'm going to use bread flour today, but as you can see, I have almost no bread flour left. But there's a way around that. So this is Vital Wheat gluten. Okay, so this is actually used in a lot of, like, to make seitan and a lot of like non-meat items, but it's also used to bulk up all-purpose flour to turn into either high gluten or bread flour. What we're gonna do is, I have my bowl here and a scale. It's important to weigh these because we're gonna be doing it by weight, not by volume. So that means if I use a cup of flour, it may not be using a cup of water. It's actually going to be less. So we're actually going to use grams. If you really want it, if you don't have a scale and you don't want to play that kind of game of trying to guess the grammage, just remember that when it comes to water and versus flour, it's pretty close. So it'd be a cup of water to a cup of flour to like 2/3 cup of water. But we're going to weigh ours out. So I'm going to start with a small starter because I already have one started ready. I started about a month ago. It's been going and bubbling and delicious. But I'm just going to teach you guys how to get something started. So you can kind of start small and then kind of work your way up if you want to. So first thing we're going to do, though, is we're going to make more bread flour. Okay. So in this case, I don't need to weigh anything. I'm just going to go cup ratio. All right. So for every cup of flour, which I have AP flour right here, I'm going to measure out 1 cup. I might actually just do 2 just to have it, because that way I've got it ready. So for every cup of flour, we are going to remove 1.5 teaspoons of flour back into the container, and we're going to add in 1.5 teaspoons of the Vital Wheat gluten. So I have 2 cups of flour here. So that means I have 3 teaspoons going in there, which equal 1 tablespoon. So I'm going to take out 1 tablespoon, put it back into my flour. I'm going to take a tablespoon, try as level as possible, try not to waste any, of the Vital Wheat gluten, go back into my bowl. And this is to make bread flour. Now, if I wanted to make high gluten flour, I would be using a cup of flour, AP flour, and adding in 2 tablespoons of the Vital Wheat gluten to the AP flour. So that's increasing the gluten. It makes it a much chewier. Like, high gluten is great for like baguette. It'll like something we want something like really, really good density, like good chew kind of bread. So once you have that all mixed up, we're really just gonna whisk it in. If you want, you can sift it. You can sift it all together, and that'll aerate the flour and bring it all together and make sure it's really well mixed. But I'm just gonna take a whisk until it's mixed in. And there we have homemade bread flour. About as good as you're going to get. Put our flour away. Save the rest of my Vital Wheat gluten. You can get that online. Found online shopping. They're pretty cheap. They're like £1 bags. A lot of people don't know about it. So sharing it with the world. If it's not out there anymore, sorry. Now we're going to start our starter mix, all right? So we're going to use water and we're going to use flour. If you notice, I'm using bottled water. The reason why I'm using bottled water is because this is non-chlorinated, all right? So basically it's distilled, it's clean, it's natural, it's beautiful water. Tap water works fine. It does, but unfortunately the amount of chlorine that's in the water to make it safe for us to drink, it does actually counteract the fermentation process. Basically what we're doing is we're fermenting flour and water together to create our own natural yeast. And so able to rise our bread. So we got a bowl. Like I said, we're going to work in grams, okay? So I'm going to tear out my bowl, which means I'm going to make the bowl say 0 on the scale, right? There's a little button that says make 0. So we're in grams. So I said we're going to start small, right? So I'm going to add my bread flour right to the rest of this. Reason why we're starting small is because as we feed our sourdough starter, which you hear people say, well, I fed my starter. There are certain times in which you need to be feeding your starter to make sure there's fresh flour and water going in to feed the natural yeast. You're making a microcosm basically. So you're making a little house for your yeast to grow and live in. Yeast live in basically. So we need to make sure we're always putting in fresh food, fresh water, and fresh flour for it to live off and eat off of. It's going to eat those sugars and create carbon dioxide. That's what makes our yeast and our nice little starter kit really, really frothy and beautiful and be able to make our dough rise. So we're going to start with 100 grams of both water and flour. You can do 113-ish is about a cup of flour. You can go higher. If you like more round numbers, you can go 125, so it's 250, 250. But honestly, if you've never done this before and you don't want to waste flour, because there is some waste happening, start small. So we're going to start with 100 grams, okay? So it's going to probably be about 3/4 of a cup of flour if you're doing it by measurement. If you go a little bit over, it's fine. Like I'm at, and drop, 101. Not a big deal. All right. So that was basically around 3/4 of a cup of flour. So as you can see, it's not a ton, right? We're going to take our bowl off. We're going to bring our scale back to 0. I'm going to use a glass measuring cup for two particular purposes. One, if you're not using a scale, you can kind of see how much water around 100 grams is going to be. And so it'll be easier to pour into our bowl. We don't want to pour water directly into it because if we pour too much, we got to add more flour, and then we're adding less, adding more, adding less, which is a pain in the butt. So, water. .110 is a little much. Go back up a wee bit. 102. Look at that. So now it's exactly the amount of flour I have in there. And if you want to look at this, this is roughly around 1/3 of a cup of water. It's like maybe a smidge over, but that's totally fine. So right now we have equal parts bread flour and water. Now you don't have to use AP flour. You don't have to use bread flour. If you have whole wheat flour or pumpernickel flour, any type of like whole germ flour, which means like there's still more grain on the actual grain for the flour itself, actually it's better to make a sourdough starter because there's more nutrients in it. There's more iron. There's more things for the yeast to kind of eat. It actually will make a much better starter. You could actually do half and half too if you wanted to. You could do half the amount of a whole wheat flour or pumpernickel flour and half all-purpose or bread or high gluten flour, and you'll have some better results too. Today, unfortunately, all I have is all-purpose flour, but it works just as well. It may take a little bit longer. It all depends on what you want. Like a really, really good classic rustic sourdough loaf will use a wonderful wheat bread, or wheat flour, excuse me. But if we're making these at home, just making it for fun, this is a good way to start. So, again, our bread flour, our water, not that difficult. Handy spatula. All right, so now we have a nice, like, flour-looking paste, right? So it's not too thick, it's not too thin. You should be able to move it around, slide out the spatula pretty nicely. We're going to use a glass mason jar with a lid, okay? I like to ferment in a nice sealable container, especially something that's not plastic. I mean, I'm nothing against plastic for storage, it's totally fine, but we're going to be fermenting this, and I just don't feel as comfortable using a plastic container. So, lid, sealable lid, good sealable lid, glass jar. All we're going to do is put our starter on the bottom, get as much as you can. Try not to get any or too much on the sides of the upper part of the jar, because we don't want it to dry out. If you do, just kind of wipe it off with a paper towel and you'll be good to go. Drop there. There we go. That's good. So this, my friends, is your starter. That's it. All right, this is this simple. This part is the simple. So moving forward, so basically what I would do, like right now, I would write today's date, today's time, and if you want to name your baby, because they are part of your family now. I have a couple in rotation right now. Kind of keep them separated, so you know if one is just flour, one is AP flour, or one is wheat flour. You can kind of name them differently. Like I have Mario and Luigi, so that way I know who's who. Now we're going to talk about feeding and fermenting. Okay, so this is going to sit out 24 hours. That's why it's important to write down the time for this. Tomorrow, around, I think it's like 1 o'clock right now, so tomorrow afternoon around 1 o'clock, I will feed this. Okay, so the feeding is important based on the volume that you're adding to this, right? So if you wanted to make a larger batch, like this eventually will ferment so much it'll be full. Tomorrow what I would do is I would take out half, I'd weigh this out. It may not be exactly 200 grams, it may be less, it may be a little bit more depending on how it's expanded. But I will take out exactly half, and I will do the exact same setup I just did now, the 100 grams of flour, the 100 grams of water, and refeed it, right? We're going to do that twice a day for 3 days, at least. Maybe 3, maybe 5, depending on the humidity in your room, until you start to see nice activation. When I say activation, you're going to see lots of bubbles. It's going to expand quite a bit. Now, you do not, but you do have to throw away half of the starter, because what you're doing is you don't want to keep adding more and keep adding more and keep adding more. All of a sudden, you'll have 6 jars of this, and you won't know what to do with it. But you don't have to start that big either. You can always start a lot smaller. If you wanted to, you could remove equal parts, or 2 to 1 parts, which is what I like to do when I'm first getting started to see how these flours are going to react. That meaning, I will weigh out, 30 grams of starter, and I will replace it with 15 grams of flour, 15 grams of water. So we are basically doing equal parts. Just to kind of see how it's going from there. And as you feel more comfortable, and as you feel like your starter is getting somewhere, the more flour and water that you add, the longer it obviously needs to take to ferment and kind of take a little bit more time. You'll feel more comfortable and start to see some results. Let me show you side by side. So I have actually not cracked this one today. So this guy birthed 2 starters. It was so full I didn't want to keep wasting it, so I was throwing some out. So I had this fermenting for a little over a week, because I kept adding a little bit more, and letting it sit out to kind of continue to ferment a little bit more. And then if you listen, I don't know if you heard that or not, but it's releasing all this wonderful gas from our yeast. And this smells awesome. It smells like wet bread, I guess, but it doesn't smell bad. And that's the good thing. If you are in doubt, throw it away. But if it smells like sour milk, or if it smells just like dog, or something that doesn't smell appeasing at all, start over. Like, this is nice. This smells like beer to me, which is great. And as you can see, it's rising as it was down a little bit too. Like, it's really coming up. So I started this a month ago. So this has been a month. And the longer your starter goes, the better it is. How can you tell that it's ready to be used? I'm glad you asked that question. This is called the water test. A little bit of water, enough for it to float, so that's what we're aiming for. If you drop a spoonful of your starter into the water and it sinks, it's not ready. But if it looks like a dumpling and it floats, she's ready to bake. And that's it. That's simple. For those of you who have my email, if you want a full-on recipe and a step-by-step of how to feed, please feel free to reach out to me. And this kind of concludes the sourdough recipe. Happy baking, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Take care. Hey, almost forgot. Eventually, you do have to refrigerate the sourdough starter. Go figure, right? I mean, the longer you set it out, the longer it's going to ferment, right? So basically, after your starter has about 3 to 5 days, and you see a good amount of activity. So now, between day 2 and day 5, we're going to be feeding twice a day. Usually within like a 10-hour period, or as, a little bit spread out as best you can. So if you're doing a tablespoon of removal, and then a tablespoon of flour and a tablespoon of water to add, that's fine. If you're doing a cup and like you kind of going in that direction, that's totally fine. Remember, the more you add to feed, the bigger your batch is going to be, and maybe the more you have to throw away. If you are removing your starter, there are lots of things out there that you can make. There's biscuits, there's pancakes, there's tons of like fun little things you can do, or eventually you just run out of starter or you have a ton of starter. If you end up using your starter to make bread, you just start this process all over again, but remember to remain and use the starter you already had. So you want to take the starter that you started with, whatever you removed from it, and then build on top of that again, and then start the whole fermentation process over again. So usually around day 3 or 5, you'll see a good amount of activity, you'll see a good amount of like frothiness going on. That's when you keep the seal nice and tight, and you put it in the fridge. You refrigerate it, and then you feed once a week. I usually have a feeding schedule, 1 day of the week, certain time of day, get the feeding done, pull some of the starter out, maybe make a loaf of bread that day, or maybe not, completely up to you. But that's it. Once you get through the first week or so of the fermentation process, all you have to do is refrigerate and then feed once. And that's it. Again, it's really simple. It may not be simple for some people. You may mess it up. It might be kind of weird, but don't get discouraged. Just keep trying. We as a people have been doing this for generations, millennia, and we all love bread. So there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Again, keep cooking, and we'll see you all soon.